The cold steel of a gun glimmered under the flashing lights, pointed straight at Senator John Kennedy. But just 5 minutes later, the man holding that gun wasn't the senator's problem anymore. He was the one in handcuffs. But before we dive into this unbelievable story, welcome to Kennedy Tales, the home of gripping, real, life-inspired narratives that shock, inspire, and remind us of the power of truth. If you enjoy powerful storytelling that keeps you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and join our family. Your support helps us bring you more stories that truly matter. Now let's step back into that lonely Louisiana highway. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that blankets a road and makes every sound sharper, every shadow darker. Senator John Kennedy gripped the wheel of his dark, blue sedan, eyes steady on the ribbon of asphalt glowing beneath his headlights. It had been a long day, meetings that stretched too far, debates that left no easy answers, and decisions that pressed heavily on his shoulders. Past midnight now, he was finally heading home. Out here, away from the city, the stars burned brighter. The hum of his engine the only sound cutting through the stillness. He wasn't speeding. 65 on the dot. Hands at 10 and 2. Years in public service had taught him discipline, composure, precision. So when sudden flashes of red and blue burst across his rearview mirror, confusion, not fear, was his first response. He checked the speedometer steady. No swerves, no mistakes, nothing. Still, the siren screamed behind him. Demanding, Kennedy exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as he pulled onto the shoulder. This was routine, he told himself. Just a misunderstanding. He respected law enforcement, understood the badge and the weight it carried. But as the cruiser rolled to a stop and its headlights drenched his car in white glare, something felt wrong. Too deliberate. Too heavy. The door creaked open. Out stepped Officer Daniel K.S., his figure cut sharp against the glow. Not tall, but postured with an authority that wasn't earned. It was demanded. His left hand hovered near his holster, his right sweeping a flashlight back and forth, slicing the darkness. Each step crunched on gravel, slow, aggressive. Kennedy lowered his window, hands visible on the wheel, palms open in compliance. "Evening, officer," he said, voice calm, steady. The same one he used in the Senate to disarm tension. K.S. didn't return the courtesy. The beam of his flashlight blinded Kennedy, sweeping across his face. Holding there, license and registration. The words were barked, flat, stripped of respect. Kennedy's eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't protocol. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" he asked, his tone still even. K.S. froze for a moment, chewing gum with deliberate slowness, before repeating. Harsher this time, license. Registration. Kennedy's patience held. "All right, officer," he said quietly. "I'm reaching into the console for my wallet." His movements were slow, careful. He retrieved his license, and alongside it, his Senate ID. The seal of the United States Senate caught the light as he held it out. Any other officer would have softened. But K.S. barely glanced at it. His eyes snapped back to Kennedy, colder than before. "Senator, huh?" The word dripped with mockery, as though Kennedy had printed the title himself. Kennedy's composure stayed intact. "Yes, sir." "Now can you tell me why I'm being stopped?" Silence stretched thick between them, broken only by the faint hum of the cruiser. Then came the words that shifted everything. "Step out of the vehicle." They hit harder than a shout. Wrong. Dangerous. Kennedy's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" His tone was calm, but steel edged his voice. K.S. stepped back, his hand hovering close to his weapon. "Step. Out." The night grew heavier, pressing like a weight on Kennedy's chest. This wasn't a debate, wasn't a hearing. This was a man with a gun, a badge, and a temper that burned hot. Kennedy's pulse stayed steady, but his mind raced, calculating every move. "Officer," he said, voice low, deliberate. "I've complied. You have my ID. If there's an issue, let's call your supervisor." Ukesa's jaw clenched, irritation sparking. "I don't need a supervisor," he snapped. His voice rose, anger bleeding through. "I said, get out." And Kennedy didn't move. Not out of defiance, but out of sheer caution. Years of navigating power, politics, and high-stakes situations had sharpened Kennedy's instincts. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was about control, a man challenging him, daring him to flinch, to cower. On what grounds? Kennedy asked. Voice steady, eyes locked on KS. For the first time, the officer faltered, lips parting as if searching for a reply. But then, worse, he stepped closer. The flashlight dropped, and his hand moved to the holster. The soft click reverberated in Kennedy's ears like a gunshot. I don't have to explain myself to you, KS said low, dangerous. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken threats. Kennedy's heartbeat remained steady, but his mind raced, calculating every possibility. He had seen traffic stops go deadly in news clips, knew how quickly a situation could spiral out of control. You do actually? Kennedy said, calm, firm, slicing through the tension. You are required to articulate a reason for this stop. I'm a United States Senator, and I'm not stepping out until you tell me why. KS' face twisted, a flash of anger cutting through. I don't give a damn who you are. His hand rested on the gun, flashlight swinging as he leaned in. You think that ID means something to me. Get out or I'll make you. The threat hit Kennedy like a weight, real and immediate. Not political danger, not abstract opposition. This was a man with a loaded weapon, no regard for rules. Kennedy's fingers tightened on the wheel, not fear but focus. Officer, you're making a mistake, he said, voice low, controlled. You're escalating without cause. Let's de-escalate this. Call your supervisor and we'll sort it out. KS let out a chilling, humorless chuckle. The mistake, he sneered, is thinking you can pull rank on me. Before Kennedy could react, KS reached for the door handle. The click jolted Kennedy, a sharp reminder this was no ordinary stop. His left hand shot to the inside handle, holding the door shut. Step back, officer, Kennedy commanded, tone unwavering, the kind that silenced rooms and demanded attention. You're out of line. KS didn't budge, gripping the door tighter. I said get out, he growled. Kennedy weighed his options. Step out and surrender to a man clearly unhinged, or stay inside and risk further escalation with a gun aimed at him. Every instinct screamed caution. You're crossing a line, Kennedy said, voice firm but measured. You know who I am. You've seen my ID. This isn't worth your career. KS smirked, eyes narrowing. Career. You think you can scare me? I'm the law out here. The arrogance ignited something in Kennedy. Not anger, but resolve. He had fought his life for justice, for rule of law. He wouldn't let a rogue officer rewrite the rules on a deserted highway. Then, a sound cut through the tension. A rustle, a voice, sharp and clear. Hey, I'm recording this. Kennedy's eyes flicked toward the source. A woman, 30 feet away, phone raised, light reflecting off her glasses. At a safe distance, but close enough to capture every detail. KS's gun, his stance. Kennedy trapped in his car. You sure you want to do this, officer? She called, voice steady despite the danger. KS froze, hand still on the door. Eyes darting between her and Kennedy, calculating. Kennedy seized the moment. Put the weapon down, he said, voice commanding, weighty with decades of earned authority. You're being recorded. The tension cracked. The balance of power shifted in an instant. This is over. Case's jaw clenched, his breathing shallow, mind clearly scrambling for a way out. The woman, Sarah, as Kennedy would later learn, kept her phone steady, her voice cutting through the tension. I've got it all, officer. The whole world is going to see this. Her words struck like a hammer, shattering the bravado KS tried to project. For a long moment, no one moved. The highway was thick with silence, every sound amplified, the crunch of gravel, the hum of engines, the distant crackle of a radio. Kennedy's heart pounded, but his face remained calm, eyes locked on KS. He knew the danger wasn't gone, but the balance had shifted. For the first time, he felt a faint hope that he would make it through the night. The shoulder of the highway was a stage, bathed in harsh headlights and the pulsing red and blue of KS's cruiser. Kennedy stood beside his sedan, hands raised. Not in surrender, but in controlled restraint. KS hovered a few feet away, hand near his holster, face a mask of defiance that barely concealed panic. Sarah's presence had changed everything. Her phone's red recording light was a silent accusation, holding KS in check. Kennedy's mind raced, analyzing every detail. The angle of her camera, the distance between him and KS, the faint wail of another siren approaching. He'd been in tough spots before, but this was different. Here, words and evidence were his only weapons. KS's eyes flicked toward Sarah, lips curling into a sneer. "Put that damn phone down," he barked, frustration cracking his voice. But Sarah didn't flinch. Her phone stayed raised, her tone steady. "You're not in charge here anymore." The word stung and KS's hand twitched toward his belt, instinctively reaching for escalation. Kennedy seized the moment. "Officer, you're on camera," he said, calm but firm, cutting through the tension. "Every move you make is being recorded. Think about what comes next." KS's gaze snapped back to Kennedy, narrowed but silent. Kennedy held his ground, hands raised, posture open yet unyielding. He was no longer just a man in a suit. He was a senator, a public figure, carrying the weight of his office, even if KS refused to acknowledge it. The distant siren grew louder, and moments later, another cruiser pulled up, lights sweeping across the scene. A second officer stepped out, broad-shouldered, expression unreadable. "What's going on here?" he asked cautiously, as if stepping into a minefield. KS didn't answer, eyes still locked on Kennedy, repeating the phrase he'd used countless times before. "Non-compliant driver." Kennedy's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before. Knew the code meant twisting truth to paint a victim as a threat. But this time, the truth had a witness and a camera. Kennedy seized the opening. "Officer Blake," he said, reading the nameplate in the dim light, voice steady and authoritative. "I'm Senator John Kennedy. I was pulled over without cause, threatened with a firearm, and ordered out of my vehicle with no explanation. I've complied with every reasonable request, and now I'm asking you to do your job. Detain Officer KS." The words hit hard, clear and unyielding. KS's composure faltered. "You can't be serious," he spat, stepping toward Kennedy, hand brushing his holster. Blake reacted instantly, arm shooting out to stop his partner. "Easy," he muttered, voice low but tense. Sarah's voice cut through once more, sharp and unrelenting. "It's all on video, officers. The gun, the threats, everything. You want to be on the news tomorrow?" Blake's eyes flicked between her and KS, processing the situation. Kennedy's heart remained steady, senses on high alert, knowing the moment was turning in his favor. He knew the power of a camera, the way it could change a story, reveal the truth, and expose lies. He also understood the pressure on two officers cornered, their careers now hanging in the balance. Blake's radio crackled, a dispatcher's voice breaking the tense silence. "Unit 12 status." Blake hesitated, thumb hovering over the device. KS's breathing was shallow, eyes flicking between Kennedy, Sarah, and the approaching lights of another cruiser. The balance was tipping, and Kennedy knew he had to keep control. "Officer Blake," he said, voice softer now, almost conversational but edged with authority. "You have a choice. You can back your partner and risk everything, or you can do what's right. You know who I am. You know this won't end quietly." Blake's face remained unreadable, but his hand fell from the radio, a small gesture, but a significant one. KS noticed immediately, and his anger erupted. "You're really listening to him," he snarled, turning on Blake. "He's just some politician trying to pull rank." Blake didn't respond. His eyes stayed on Kennedy, calculating. The third cruiser screeched to a stop, and two more officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. One, a lieutenant with silver bars on his collar, strode forward, scanning KS's tense stance, Sarah's phone, and Kennedy's raised hands. "Someone want to explain this?" he demanded, sharp and authoritative. "Lieutenant," Kennedy said, lowering his hands slowly, deliberately reclaiming control of the moment. "I'm Senator John Kennedy. Officer KS pulled me over without cause, threatened me with his weapon, and refused to acknowledge my identification. This woman has it all on video. I want him detained immediately. A recognition flickered in the lieutenant's eyes as he turned to KS. "Is that true?" KS' face twisted, defiance mixed with desperation. "Non-compliant," he muttered, his voice weak and hollow. Sarah stepped forward. Phone still recording. "Non-compliant," she said, disbelief dripping from every word. "He showed you his ID, told you who he was, and you pulled a gun on him. It's all here." She raised her phone, the glowing screen an undeniable testament. The lieutenant's jaw tightened, eyes shifting to Blake, whose silence now felt like complicity. "Cuff him," the lieutenant ordered, nodding toward KS. Blake hesitated, loyalty to his partner clashing with the reality of the situation. The lieutenant snapped, and Blake reluctantly moved, pulling out his cuffs. KS's face went pale as the metal clicked around his wrists. "This is a mistake," KS muttered, voice raw and disbelieving. "You're going to regret this." Kennedy watched silently, a surge of relief tempered by resolve. This wasn't over, not for KS, not for him, not for the system that allowed it. The lieutenant turned to Blake. "You too," he said, voice cold. Shock flashed across Blake's face. "Sir?" "I didn't," he began, but the lieutenant cut him off. "You stood there and let it happen." "That's enough." Blake's shoulders slumped as another officer cuffed him. The scene was surreal, flashing lights, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Sarah's camera capturing every moment, every shift in power. Kennedy exhaled slowly, hands now at his sides, the weight of the night settling into his bones. He turned to Sarah, meeting her gaze. "Thank you," he said quietly, sincerely. She nodded, lowering her phone but keeping it ready. "Somebody had to?" she said, the adrenaline fading and a faint tremor in her voice. The lieutenant approached Kennedy, a mix of respect and unease in his expression. "Senator, are you all right?" he asked, formal but genuine. Kennedy nodded, eyes still on KS, now being led to a cruiser. "I'm fine," he said steadily. "But this isn't about me. This is about what happens when power goes unchecked. I want internal affairs involved, and I want that video preserved." The lieutenant nodded, already pulling out his radio to make the call. As KS and Blake were loaded into separate cruisers, Kennedy's mind shifted. This wasn't just a bad stop. It was a symptom of something deeper. Something he'd seen in letters from his constituents, in stories crossing his desk. He'd always believed in the rule of law, in the men and women sworn to uphold it. But tonight showed how fragile that system could be in the wrong hands. Sarah's video was a weapon, a tool to expose the truth, but it was only the beginning. As the cruisers pulled away, sirens fading into the night, Kennedy knew the real fight was just starting. He would make sure KS faced consequences, not just for him, but for everyone else who'd faced a gun and a badge without a camera to save them. The morning after the highway incident, the world seemed to shift. Sarah's video, a grainy yet undeniable record of Officer Daniel KS's aggression and the tense standoff with Senator John Kennedy, exploded across social media before the sun had fully risen. By midday, news outlets were replaying the footage on loop. The image of KS's hand on his gun, his sneer as he dismissed Kennedy's Senate ID, burned into the public's consciousness. Hashtags multiplied, OPEDs poured in, and Louisiana State Police Headquarters was swarmed with reporters demanding answers. Kennedy sat in his office, a modest room lined with books and framed letters from constituents, his phone buzzing incessantly. He ignored it, eyes fixed on a muted TV screen where a pundit dissected the incident, gesturing wildly at a freeze frame of KS's face. His expression was unreadable, but his mind raced, not with anger, but with quiet, resolute determination. Last night had been about survival. Today was about accountability, not just for KS and Blake, but for a system that had allowed such behavior to go unchecked for too long. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin, letting the weight of the moment settle. This wasn't just his story anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever faced the sting of unchecked power. The fallout was swift. By mid-afternoon, Louisiana State Police announced KS had been stripped of his badge and charged with assault with a deadly weapon, a felony carrying years behind bars. Blake, His silent accomplice was suspended indefinitely, his role as an enabler under scrutiny. The department issued a carefully worded statement expressing regret, without admitting systemic failure. But the public wasn't buying it. Protests formed outside the state capitol, signs demanding reform and transparency swaying in the humid air. Kennedy watched the coverage, jaw tight. He'd seen this before, outrage flaring bright, then fading buried under bureaucracy and political maneuvering. He wasn't naive. He knew how easy it was for the powerful to wait out a scandal, to let the noise die down until the world moved on. But he also knew he had something they didn't: a platform, a voice, and a responsibility to use both. He picked up his phone. Not to answer the barrage of calls, but to dial a number he'd saved the night before Sarah's. She answered on the second ring, cautious but warm. "Senator," she said, faint surprise in her tone. "I need your help," Kennedy said, voice steady. "This isn't over. Meet me at the community center in Baton Rouge tomorrow night. We're going to speak to the people, not just the press." The next evening, the community center, a low brick building plastered with flyers for youth programs and voter drives, was filled with anticipation. Mothers with children on their hips, retirees in folding chairs, young activists with notebooks, all waiting. Sarah stood near the front. Phone no longer a weapon but a symbol of courage, a reminder of what one person could do. Kennedy stepped to the podium. Suit slightly rumpled from a day of meetings, eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't have a prepared speech. He didn't need one. He had spent his career talking to people, not at them. "Good evening," he began, voice steady, the same cadence that had calmed the highway standoff. "I'm here because of what happened 2 nights ago, but also because of what's happened too many times before that. What happened to me wasn't new. It was just caught on camera." Murmurs rippled through the room. Kennedy paused. "I'm a senator," he continued, "but that night, I was just a man on a road facing a gun and a badge. If it wasn't for Sarah," he gestured toward her, and the room erupted in applause, "I might not be standing here. Most people don't have a camera, a title, or a way to make the world listen. That's why we're here. To make sure they do." For 10 minutes, he spoke not about himself, but about the letters he'd received over the years. Stories of traffic stops gone wrong, families torn apart by a system protecting its own. He didn't sugarcoat the challenges or promise easy fixes, but laid out a plan: mandatory body cameras, independent oversight boards, stricter penalties for officers who abused power. The crowd listened, some taking notes, others whispering, a shared sense of purpose growing with every word. When Sarah took the microphone, the room fell silent. She wasn't a politician, but her voice was steady, raw with the weight of what she'd seen. "I was scared that night," she admitted, gripping the podium. "I thought about driving past, minding my own business, but I couldn't. If we all look away, nothing changes." She told her story. Why she stopped, why she raised her phone, and about her brother, pulled over years ago and humiliated, his story buried because no one recorded it. "This isn't about one senator or one cop," she said, eyes sweeping the room. "It's about all of us. We've got to hold the line. Not just when it's on the news, but every day." The applause was deafening, a release of frustration and hope. Kennedy felt something shift inside him, a recognition that this room, this moment, was the real battleground. The meeting stretched into the night, questions and stories pouring out. Mothers spoke of sons arrested on flimsy charges, families torn apart. Retired officers admitted witnessing misconduct, carrying their regrets silently. Kennedy listened, answered where he could, promising to carry their voices to Washington. When the room emptied, he and Sarah stood alone, the weight of the evening settling around them. "You meant what you said?" Sarah asked. Not a question, but a statement about making this bigger than him. Kennedy nodded, distant but resolute. "I've got a vote and a voice. If I don't use them now, what's the point?" She handed him a flash drive. "The video," she said. "Use it. Show them what's at stake." Back in his office the next day, Kennedy met with aides. drafting letters to the Justice Department and state officials demanding a federal review of police training and disciplinary processes. He called for public hearings. Not in Washington, but in communities like Baton Rouge, where those most affected could speak. The video, verified and released with Sarah's permission, became a catalyst for action. Lawmakers who had stayed silent began to speak up, wary of the public's growing demand for change. Kennedy didn't stop there. He reached out to advocacy groups, met with families who'd lost loved ones to police misconduct, and pushed for legislation tying federal funding to police reform. It wasn't glamorous. Bills moved slowly, compromises diluted ideals, but it was real. He knew real change took time. The lesson of that highway night wasn't just about KS's cuffs or Blake's suspension. It was about responsibility, the kind that starts with one person choosing to act. Whether raising a phone or raising a voice, Kennedy learned it from Sarah, from the community center crowd, from the letters pouring in after the video went viral. Justice wasn't a single moment. It was a movement, built on the courage of ordinary people who refused to look away. For anyone listening, the message was cleared. You don't need a title to make a difference. Speak up, show up, hold the powerful accountable. The system isn't perfect, but it bends when enough hands push. Kennedy knew he couldn't fix it alone, but he could start where he stood, and so could anyone else. As he prepared for the next fight, a stack of letters from constituents on his desk, he felt a quiet hope, not in victory, but in the work itself, in the people who'd carry it forward long after the headlines faded.